Hello, hello, and welcome everyone to In Time. And with me today is Isandring. Isandring, how are you?
I'm doing pretty good.
That's good. I'm I'm in recovery. It's been a really crazy 24 hours, but my wife and I do that line from Scrooged, which is one of I think my two favorite Christmas movies, Scrooged, and Love Actually. And but for Scrooge, it's, I'm alive and so are you. After every crisis, we're just like, there you go. That's what we're gonna. So I have a couple things I do want to cover, but before I do that, what are your favorite Christmas movies? Now I just gotta know.
Christmas movies? Oh,
Yeah.
I have a passionate hate for the what is that? I don't even know the damn name of it. The one with the leg lamp and the you'll shoot your eye out.
Oh yeah, Christmas Carol.
No, it's not a Christmas Carol. It's like a Christmas Story or something like that. Anyway,
yeah, no, maybe it is a Christmas Story. Yeah. Somebody in the live channel now.
I don't know why I dislike it. I just don't like the movie. Holiday classic. Everybody always talks about that movie. But favorite holiday. I used to watch Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, the claymation one.
Mm-hmm.
That one I watched every year growing up. I didn't have cable or anything. We had like 3 channels living in the country, so it was on every year, along with The Wizard of Oz. So there's a couple that I guess are a little nostalgic for me, just because it was something that I saw growing up. But do I have an actual favorite Christmas? There's been a couple versions of A Christmas Carol that I've really enjoyed.
Scrooge is our family one. The girls are too young, I think, to appreciate Love Actually, but Scrooged we all sit and watch with Bill Murray. I think that's yeah.
It was funny. I mean, there's several that I like, but as far as just is there like one I really like? I haven't watched a single Christmas movie this year, so I don't really have a favorite one. I have ones that I don't particularly have an interest in watching. And then some that if they were on for some reason, I mean, I don't really watch TV or movies really much at all. You know, there's a few series that I try and follow on some of the streaming services, but being in the truck a lot, I just don't. I mean, the options are available to get things like TV and stuff. I don't watch TV enough. If I have enough time, when I'm stopped, I'll read before I watch TV, unless it's something specific like The Witcher. I've been really interested in The Witcher. I keep trying to get caught up on Game of Thrones, but I guess I'm way late on that one. But so there's a couple, but like I said, I don't have a lot of time to be able to watch something or to read. So if it's not an audio version, I probably don't. I don't get to see it very often.
Yeah. All right. Well, here's sort of the plan for tonight, and what I'm going to do here. Actually, let's I wonder if no, I probably can't do that. Okay. So plan for tonight is as follows. I do have some like a very quick rundown I want to do of some interesting stuff in the news. Some of it's really rather extraordinary, I think. I'm going to do a quick rundown of that, and then anyone who wants to call in to discuss either anything in the rundown or any topic in particular, we can discuss. We got a wide range of whatever anybody wants to talk about. So the lines are already open. It's 1-406-4 in time. That's 1-406-446 8463. The number is in the description. I'll put a comment in and pin it there in a little bit. But so let me just do a sort of a quick rundown, and we can cover that. And then if you want to call in and complain about any of the co-hosts or anything like that, you can go right ahead. So call in number. We will happily discuss anything that any just really crazy far right-wing beliefs that anybody on this panel may hold, maybe. So just saying. All right. Severe drought has struck.
So you're inviting people to. So you're inviting people to come and complain about you?
I don't hold any far right views, unfortunately. No, that's not me.
Okay. Well,
I wonder who's left.
I know who you're talking about.
No, it's a mystery. It's a cosmic mystery. We'll figure it out maybe. A severe drought has struck Kenya, Ethiopia, and Somalia. Hundreds of thousands of cattle have died. They've lost a tremendous number of crops. 3.4 million people are right now in need of emergency aid, and that number is expected to rise to at least 10 million. The Guardian is reporting that 𝐂𝐚𝐥𝐥 a Tunisian who was the chairman of the UN investigation into war crimes by the Royal House of Saud in Yemen, was hacked by the Pegasus software in August of 2019, shortly before releasing a report that found that the Royal House of Saud, quote, committed serious violations of international humanitarian law that could lead to criminal responsibility for war crimes. This would be the second time that we have now confirmed that someone who was critical of Saudi Arabia, a country which does in fact license the Pegasus software, had their phones hacked by it in apparent violation of the Israeli developers' terms of service. His phone is confirmed to have been hacked and is on the list, the original list that we reported of 50,000 phones, which were purportedly all hacked by the Pegasus software. And so far, they just keep confirming. They just find the people who are on that list, check their phones, and sure enough. So, and that list included dissidents, it included journalists, it included political rivals, none of whom should really have been on that list. So that's really, it's adding to, I mean, Pegasus is just really, the whole thing is pretty serious. The January 6th Select Committee is weighing the possibility of a criminal referral of Donald Trump to Attorney General Merrick Garland and the Department of Justice. Legal experts expect that, in fact, there will be a referral, and they also expect criminal charges, including possibly racketeering, to be filed against Donald Trump by the Southern District of New York very, very soon. David K. Johnson reported on MSNBC that he expects racketeering and other RICO statute offenses imminently, meaning that Trump would be facing serious federal and state criminal charges in at least 2 states. Meanwhile, the January 6th panel has also requested an interview with Republican Representative Scott Perry of Pennsylvania, making him the first sitting member of Congress to be sought in this investigation. He has indicated that he will not be coming in for an interview. Donald Trump has responded to the increased pressure of the January 6th Commission, saying, quote, all the Democrats want to do is put people in jail. They are vicious, violent, radical left thugs. They are destroying people's lives, which is the only thing they are good at. They could not get out of Afghanistan without disgracing our country. God, it's like listening to a child. The economy and inflation are a disaster. I hate it when inflation's a disaster. They are letting thugs and murderers into our country. Their DAs, AGs, and damn law enforcement are out of control. This is what happens in communist countries and dictatorships, and they don't think they'll be held accountable for rigging the 2020 presidential election. January 6th Unselect Committee is a cover-up for what took place on November 3rd, and the people of our country won't stand for it. A recent 2021 study has found that people who were already infected by the flu and then got COVID suffer far more lung damage than people who get either disease alone. Another study confirms yet again that while when unboosted, the COVID vaccine is 95% effective against Delta, but less than 30% effective against Omicron, and only goes up to 75% after a booster. However, the overwhelming evidence thus far suggests that Omicron has a lower mortality rate. However, the new data from South Africa's Gauteng province shows significantly higher hospitalization rates and higher fatalities. Admission to London hospitals are trending higher than one would expect given the data so far, suggesting that Omicron may in fact be hospitalizing people faster by at least 30 to 40%. And Sinister Porpoise is waiting for us in the lobby. We will bring Sinister in just a minute, but thank you for joining us, and we'll bring you in as soon as I'm done with this. Sarah Palin has announced that she will get the COVID vaccine, quote, over my dead body. The U.S. has confirmed its first death related to Omicron. He was a Texas man, unvaccinated, who had actually previously been infected with COVID-19. Washington State Senator Doug Erickson, who sponsored legislation in Washington to prohibit COVID-19 vaccine mandates has died from COVID-19. The Omicron variant has already surpassed the Delta variant and is now the dominant strain in the United States, representing more than 73% of the new COVID-19 cases in the last week. In response to what appears to be a strong COVID surge, Portugal has shut down bars and nightclubs for at least 2 weeks and has imposed new limits on gathering sizes outside. Sweden has also begun ratcheting up restrictions due to the new Omicron virus, as has Germany. London, Paris, and Rome have all canceled their scheduled New Year's events. New Zealand has canceled its border reopening. And Hong Kong is declaring that all government employees must be fully vaccinated against COVID-19 or get tested every 3 days at their own expense. Israel is banning all travel to the U.S. after reportedly 10% of passengers on a flight from Miami 10% of the passengers tested positive for Omicron. The Dutch are going into a lockdown, a semi-lockdown, closing non-essential shops, schools, bars, and other public venues at least until mid-January. And the U.S. military is now beginning reprimand procedures, including discharges for at least 2,700 soldiers who have refused to get vaccinated. The White House COVID-19 response team sent out a press release on the official White House government website with the presidential seal saying, quote, "As we've explained in prior briefings, the Omicron variant is more transmissible, and our medical experts anticipate it will lead to a rise in cases. But unlike last winter, we now have the power to protect ourselves. We are intent on not letting Omicron disrupt work and school for the vaccinated. You've done the right thing, and you will get through this. For the unvaccinated, you're looking at a winter of severe illness and death for yourselves, your families, and the hospitals you may soon overwhelm." Meanwhile, anti-vaxxers have begun booking block appointments to mass vaccination centers in order to stop other people from successfully vaccinating themselves. And that's a brief rundown of what's going on. So either give us a call or just come into the hang if you would like. Join us in our quest to cure Isandring of his incurable conservativeness. But first we have, and I know Isandring did want to touch on at least one economic topic, which I would definitely like to discuss. But we're going to have Isandring, not Isandring, we're going to have the Sinister Porpoise come on in. So let's bring her in here now. And Sinister, welcome. How are you?
Give me just a second.
All right, take your time. Well, while Sinister is getting herself ready, what did you want to discuss, Isandring?
Getting a little kind of annoyed a little bit about some of the economic commentary that's been going on especially about inflation.
Yep, okay.
One of the things that's kind of irritating, is a lot of people are coming out like, look, we've had since November of last year to November of this year, we're at like 5.8% inflation. It's the second highest inflation in a single year ever recorded in U.S. history.
Yeah.
I'm like, well, that's not exactly true. And there's something that I think people probably don't realize is, we've gone through inflationary pressures before.
Mm-hmm.
The 1970s into the very early 1980s was a very high inflationary period for the United States, caused lots of problems. And now we're kind of, there's so many people talking about economic issues, talking about comparing today to the 1970s. At least in regards to inflation, there's something that they're neglecting to mention, and that's in the 1990s, the government changed how inflation is measured. Mm. Their official reason for this was that their previous calculations for the CPI were overstating inflationary pressures. So they were going to introduce some corrections.
And it's the CPI-U, so it's right. So it's the Consumer Price Index, and it's the U version of the Consumer Price Index. So it's the Consumer Price Index for the U is urban. It's a portion of the population that is considered to be representative of the majority. So is that roughly accurate?
Yes.
All right, yeah. Perfect. Yep, see what you're saying.
So and so that was the reason that they gave for changing it. Was, before it was overstating inflationary pressures, and so we're going to correct that. I find that a little bit disingenuous considering some of the changes that were made. Two of them that I find most suspect in this are owner equivalent rent versus the actual rent, and something called hedonics. Now, they changed this from measuring what people are actually paying in rent. I mean, we have a rental market. We know what people are paying for rent year over year over year. We measure that. It's a number. It's verifiable. It's simply statistical data. What are people paying? Well, they changed that and said, no, that's not, that's overstating inflationary pressures. So we're going to use something called owner equivalent rent, which means we're going to poll a bunch of people who own their own homes and say, hey, what do you think you could get for rent for your house if you rented it today? And they get the number, and that's the number they use. So the increase year over year, month over month of what people are saying. So it's entirely subjective. And of course, you're asking people who aren't actually in the rental market or probably know really anything at all about the rental market, what the rental market's doing. So I find that problematic. Mm-hmm. The other one is hedonics, which I find suspect. The reasoning may or may not be sound, but they're not transparent about how they really go about computing this. And that is that if you buy a TV last year and then you buy a TV this year, the TV this year probably is of better quality and probably has more options available with it than it did last year. So that's an increase in the value of the television. So we need to discount the cost of TVs today to reflect that improvement.
Oh, I hadn't heard of that. Okay.
That is the, that's their, what they're saying that they're doing it for, so that they can get they claim it's a more apples to apples comparison, because generally, technology gets better over time. So I wonder how they're doing that. So instead of just taking, again, raw numbers, so we actually know what the numbers are, how much you paid for a TV this year versus how much you paid for a TV last year, but maybe last year's TVs weren't smart TVs. This year they are. So they're saying, well, you're getting a qualitative increase, and in order to get an apples-to-apples comparison, we need to account for that and reduce the price based on that. So I don't know. It makes me question the motives behind some of these changes when we do that. But if you take the inflation numbers that we have today, which again is like 5.6, I believe, for November at least, and you compare them. Okay, well, what was the highest inflation ever recorded in the United States? It was 1980. It was 13.5%. And so you think, well, that's a pretty big difference. Except if you were to, there's been a couple of economic think tank type groups that have pointed out that these are apples and oranges comparisons. You cannot take the CPI today and the CPI of 1980 and compare them side to side, because they're not the same numbers. Because of those changes in the 90s, we compute it completely differently. So if you want to get a accurate representation of what inflation is actually doing, then we need to make these numbers correct. So you either need to recalculate the 1980 numbers using today's standards, which is very difficult to do because we track a lot more things today, and we do some things differently, like computing hedonics and owner equivalent rent. You can't really do that for the 1980s because they didn't gather any of that information. Yeah. So the really only option that you have is to compute today's inflationary numbers with the same standard that was used in the 1980s. If you do that, then it comes out to about 14.9%, roughly 15%. I think they said it was 14.9 something percent inflation rate for 2021 so far. Now we still have this month, December, is not accounted for. That only goes through the end of November. So if you put them together and calculate everything exactly the same, so you have a true apples to apples comparison, this year, 2021, has been the highest year for inflation ever recorded in the United States. And I don't think enough people know that. Also, there's an issue with the Federal Reserve. In 1979, the inflation rate was 17.3 something percent. We'll just round to 17.3 because I don't remember what the hundredths is. The federal funds rate that the Fed had in place in 1979 was 11.2%.
So,
from 1979 to 1980, the inflation rate went up from 11.3% to 15.5%. Paul Volcker, the head of the Fed at the time, realized he was facing a pretty serious problem. The issue with inflation is once inflationary pressures start to build, you can very quickly, especially once they start getting up into double digits and start climbing, and they're showing an increase like that, you run the risk of kind of tipping over the edge into a cascading hyperinflationary environment. When that happens, it's over. You can't stop that. It is a cascading event. This is what happened in Weimar, Germany. It happened in that place that Russia's fighting out, where the Crimea is. I just suddenly forgot the name of the country.
Yeah.
No, that's the name of the peninsula. What's the name of the country? Anyway, yeah, that place.
Ukraine?
Yeah, Ukraine.
Yeah.
Yes, sorry, Ukraine. It happened in Ukraine. It happened in Brazil. It happened in Zimbabwe. These are all fairly recent events. These have all happened in like the last 50 years.
Well, Zimbabwe was a little bit different.
Well, yeah, there's a lot of other issues that happen, but what causes a hyperinflationary cascade, the fundamental issues remain the same. The catalysts completely change, and of course, all these countries are different too. So they have different approaches and they have different monetary. So there are differences in the systems. The hyperinflationary cascade happens in the same way, and nobody was able to stop them. And of course, in Zimbabwe was probably one of the worst examples because it led to a genocide. I mean, half of the male population died after their economy collapsed. And you can still to this day get 1 million Zimbabwe dollar notes. Their hyperinflation actually crested over 1,000% in a month.
Jesus.
So there's 1,000% inflation in a single month. I think the highest it got up to was like 1,200% in 1 month. So you could be a millionaire in Zimbabwe and have less money than the average homeless person has today in the United States, at least as far as purchasing power. So Zimbabwe was a very extreme example because it led to some really bad things. But it also happened, in Brazil. I mean, it's happened in a great number. Great Britain had the same thing happen to itself, though it wasn't necessarily a hyperinflationary event that caused the collapse of the pound sterling. All of these countries are still here today, but they all went through some pretty serious. I mean, there was a famine in Ukraine after the collapse of their monetary system. So it's important, and Paul Volcker realized that this was a serious, potentially very serious event, and that he needed to get inflation under control. So he realized that having the Fed funds rate equal to the inflation rate was not slowing inflation down because they still had another 2.5% increase in the inflation rate to 13.5, 2.3, sorry. So this wasn't working. What it finally took to stop the increasing inflation of the 70s going into the early 80s was increasing the Federal Reserve fund rate all the way up to 20%. And he did that in 1982 because 1980 was horrible. He did that in 1981. And 1981 wasn't looking all that great either, though it did end up being, the inflation rate did begin to drop then, and then precipitously dropped after that.
So let me interrupt real quick. I do want to ask you a question, and then I do want to make sure that we hear from Sinister Porpoise and see what she wants to discuss. But is your argument that the Fed should not be interfering with? Well, I mean, in that case, I mean, the Fed was able to. It sounds like what you're saying. The Fed was able to reduce inflation by upping the rate rather significantly, as you're suggesting. What is your suggest? I'm not entirely sure where you're going with it.
I'm not really making an argument. I'm frustrated because it doesn't seem like a lot of people know what's actually going on. They just realize that, there's a lot of people, I've heard in the news, a lot of people, talking about inflation for average people. It's like, look, it's costing $3,500 more this year to maintain the same standard of living you had last year, and that's what really matters is what are the real effects on people in the country. And inflation is particularly vicious because it hurts the most vulnerable people in the United States. Warren Buffett and Elon Musk and the guy from Amazon, Jeff Bezos. They're not really going to care too much about inflation. It's going to change their behavior. They're going to start buying more things, more commodities, because commodities maintain purchasing power, whereas cash is losing it. And inflation can also be very good for people heavily in debt, because it destroys the value of the debt that you have, making it essentially easier for you to pay off, provided your income remains fairly stable, which is not currently happening. We actually have stagflation.
That's not quite what we have, because incomes have started to go up, but they're not keeping up with inflation.
Correct.
It's not that where they've been stagnant. They're starting to go up. It's just businesses are having to keep them up, and that's one reason why prices are going up.
Right, and real income is dropping because inflation is outpacing. Pay went up in the 70s as well, and it was still considered stagflation, and we consider it, considered that the rate that pay isn't really going up because real purchasing power of your pay is reducing. And by right now, pay I think went up something like 3.4%, I think, for 2021 so far, and inflation is at 5.4%. The official number is at 5.4%. So your purchasing power of what you're getting paid is going down.
Yes, but that's on average. Some companies like Kellogg's now have had to make major raises, and I think if the pressure stays the way it is on employment, companies are going to have to find out. They're going to have to start paying people a lot more, because $7.25 an hour is not something people are going to work for anymore.
Yeah, correct. And that's other pressures dealing with actual pay. So yeah, they are going to have to. And I've also these are just things that are kind of irritating me about the what's being said about what's happening economically, because you're not getting the whole picture. There's another issue where Biden specifically said that some of these markets, the reason that your prices are going up, he said specifically about the beef market, was because businesses were being a bit greedy and were just raising prices. Except
that is true in some markets, especially with healthcare. There's no reason insulin was jacked up the way it was, other than companies could do it.
Right.
That was the choice
right
of an
now.
individual.
I'm kind of talking about yeah, and that also happened significantly before this particular issue. Yeah. So when we look at this can happen. I'm not saying that it's not true in some select areas, but on average, that is absolutely not true, because the PPI, which is the producer price index, which measures how much producers are paying for the materials to produce whatever it is they're producing, that's gone up to 9.6%. From November of last year to November of this year is 9.6%. The official CPI, Consumer Price Index, what customers are paying, that's gone up 5.4%. There's a discrepancy there. So the costs of businesses have gone up 9.6%, but they've only raised their prices 5.4%. Businesses, on average, have been absorbing quite a lot of the inflationary pressures. They can't do that forever. They can do it in the short term, because most of the higher inflationary pressures have happened during this last quarter, is when we've really started to see a spike. So the businesses are going, well, we can't raise prices that much because that would hurt our business. So we're going to absorb some of these costs, at least in the short run, hoping that inflation will level out. It'll be okay. We don't want to just jack our prices up and find out, January it's back down to 2%. So that makes a little bit of sense, but it's disingenuous to say that it's businesses are just being greedy, because they're actually absorbing some of the costs.
I didn't say all businesses would being greedy.
I didn't claim you did. I'm saying an average, and I wasn't talking about what you said specifically, but rather what the government was talking about. So it's important, I think, or should be important, that people recognize that businesses are trying to mitigate some of the impact of this. Now, it's also in their own best interest to do so, but it's helpful for the consumer as well. So they're not particularly evil about any of this stuff. So it's just we're facing a position where the only way that we stopped inflation in the 70s was raising the funds rate up to 20%, which had some very negative consequences as well. And they'll have even more negative consequences today. One of the reasons our Fed rate is currently at 0% is because when they tried to, just before the pandemic struck, when they were trying to raise rates, they got it up to 2%. And they started having some significant problems. And of course, it was a political decision to pressure the Fed to drop those rates back down to zero because Donald Trump didn't want a bad economy. And raising the rates higher was going to damage the economy. It was going to slow down investments, which probably should happen. There's so many price bubbles going on in the markets right now, and they're trying to stop corrections. And this is leading to a lot of issues. But there is the Fed keeps talking about, well, we have the tools to work with this because they had them in the past. The problem is that I don't see it being viable for them to be able to do what would actually be needed. Because if you keep all of the numbers the same, we're essentially in 1980 with the inflationary pressures, and our Fed rate is at 0%. And it took it raising from 11.2 to 20% to stop the inflation. One of the concerns is that we're not actually doing anything that would fight against at least monetary policy. The government isn't doing anything that would actually fight inflation. So now it's essentially completely up to the actual economic pressures. We're running out of the ability to export our inflation because the nation our country has the world's reserve currency. The United States is incredibly privileged in the world because we have the world reserve currency. That means all commodities are priced in US dollars. So we don't have to care too much about what the monetary exchange or currency exchange rates are between different currencies because everything's priced in our currency. That's not true for any other country in the world, which is also one of the reasons why most other countries that have tried some of the monetary policies that the U.S. has been pursuing have collapsed faster. Some of them haven't. Some of them were able to taper off. Some other mitigating circumstances happened that kept that from happening. But the reason that we didn't end up like Greece or Portugal or Ireland in 2008 is because we have the world's reserve currency. Everybody in the world wants U.S. dollars. And because of that, we can export quite a lot of the inflationary pressures of increasing the monetary supply to the rest of the world. But there's a limit to how long we can do that. And one of the most damaging things that could ever happen to the United States is to lose the rest of the world saying, your currency is no longer stable enough to be a reserve currency, and we're not going to use it. That was a very difficult thing for the world to be able to change at this point, but they will if it gets bad enough. And we need to be careful and be cognizant of what's happening to our economy because there is very large dangers that are out on the horizon that we need to make sure that we don't drive towards.
All right, let me quickly do this. So we do have a super chat that I want to get to. Then I want to make sure Porpoise gets a chance to answer. And then there is a question that I do have because somebody brought something to my attention that I thought was interesting and worth discussing. But first, Jake 4D, $5. Jake, thank you so much once again for your support. We really do appreciate it. So thank you for taking the time to super chat and let us. We get, as everyone knows, we get demonetized we've been blocked in China a number of episodes. I get notification. We get hit on China. We get hit by a number of it's like people can't see in time in China. What do you know? But thank you so much for your support. It really means a lot. I appreciate it. So quote, what people are paying for rent is between 10% and 100% less than what the same apartment goes for a new renter. I think that's a spectacular point is, usually in part because of inflationary pressures. If inflation is going up higher than what you can raise the rent for, either because of legally or for whatever reason, whenever you get a new a new renter, and I think that's a very good point. I think it's very hard. People can't really self-assess what they think they could rent the place for. So I don't know how that economic data works, but if that's how it works, that's what Isandring is reporting. That sounds pretty foolish, and I think you've brought up another example that I hadn't even thought of. So thank you very much, Jake, for your super chat. I really appreciate it. Sinister, what were you going to say?
Oh, geez. I had something computer related in mind, but I can't remember what it was.
I hate when I do that. It's like I had something and then I've got to hold it for a minute and then you say something interesting and poof, my other thought's gone.
Well, economics doesn't really interest me that much, but
we don't have to talk about it. I was just frustrated. It was kind of like I'm going to vent for a minute because I don't think that we're getting a good picture of some of the economic damage that's been done. And people are giving Joe Manchin a whole hell of a lot of shit because he finally stood up and just said, no, I'm not going to support Build Back Better because, you're talking about whatever the price tag was, except that I think that it was a little disingenuously done because they put a bunch of time limits on some of these things to lower the price tag when I don't think anybody realistically believes that they're going to increase something like the child tax care credit and they're not going to extend it beyond, so the original price tag is more or less still what the original or what it's really going to cost, because I don't think that they're going to allow some of these programs to sunset. And that's what the objection that Joe Manchin had to it. And he's like, look, we have a inflationary problem, and this inflationary problem can be devastating. I heard him say specifically, that's like almost a direct quote. We have an inflationary problem in the country.
Well,
of course, my news is a day behind because I'm watching it on Hulu. But
I think we have an impending huge impending inflation problem coming up, because I think we've been kicking the can down the road in order to try to keep the economy from tanking. But that does bring up, and I think it may be for a call-in show, just because we're getting into some pretty esoteric stuff. This may not be a great topic for a call-in show, but at some point, aside from this, I'd also love to discuss with you just what is the role of the Federal Reserve, because and you and I already kind of had that discussion earlier, and I think you and I would probably find some common ground on it. I think the Federal Reserve is far weaker than we like to think it is in terms of what it can actually do. I think that's probably a good thing, and it should be employed far less often than it is. And I think the times when we need it, thank God it's there. 2008 is a great example of it. But past that, there's not a lot the Federal Reserve really should be used for, and it can be problematic. So, but that probably is something we should say.
Speaking of moving me away from my terrible conservative ideas, I will bet that you and I will agree quite a lot on the Federal Reserve, because I'm not one of the people that's like, abolish the Fed. I see the argument that's made, especially from the Keynesian side of economics, for why the Fed is necessary. Like I see that argument, and I think it's got merit, and I think it's a pretty decent argument. But even the Keynesians, if they're being completely honest, will say the government isn't even following Keynes's approach to economics, let alone the Austrian approach. So, and that creates some problems.
Considering the Keynesian approach and the Austrian approach are completely different from what I remember from economics. Even though, do any of us have a background in economics? I don't.
I'm just self-taught, and in particular, just because it's much more in Austrian economics and neoliberal economics, simply because I decided I read Atlas Shrugged, and I decided, okay, I actually liked it, and I thought Ayn Rand really knew what she was talking about, but I also disagreed with her fundamentally, and I tried to figure out sort of how and where. So I did a huge deep dive into economics, and I'd studied some economics in college, and my book was a rebuttal to Ayn Rand's Atlas Shrugged. And in order to rebut it, I had to understand Austrian economics and neoliberal economics, really just forwards and backwards. So I did, at least for that. It's been a while since I've really gotten into an economics discussion, but every now and then I'll get into it with either an objectivist or any form of neoliberal. The most common is Austrian school. But what's his name? Alan Greenspan purportedly was, now he was a student of Ayn Rand, so he was essentially a neoliberal. I don't think he identified that way, and he didn't completely act that way, but that was roughly he was a very sort of government should be hands off, and he was still wildly successful. But the Fed can't act in a neoliberal way, because according to the neoliberals, we shouldn't have a Fed. So if the Fed does anything, you're already violating neoliberal policies in terms of Keynesian or post-Keynesian. There's a lot that the Fed can do sort of day to day to keep things humming, but really they should kind of stay out of it, except for emergencies. And what our government has realized, and I think Isandring's actually got a really great point here, because our currency has so much leverage in other countries, they realized, hey, wait a minute, there's a lot we really could do if we want to put our hands on the scales. And the problem is that's actually far more complicated than most people understand, and Bill Clinton figured that out when he created the 2008 housing market by saying, I want to put every American in a home. Great idea, but were you going to say something, Porpoise? So, guess, no.
Sorry, I was trying to look up what I was. It was some, I think it was something cybersecurity related, but it certainly wasn't what I just linked in chat.
Oh, yeah, how your kids are. Well, I've found I can stay ahead of my kids, but not by a whole heck of a lot. But I have a pretty strong computer background, as you know. No. It's not.
Don't do that. What you need to do is teach them, is put it on your cell phone or on these areas. Put simple controls at first and give hints about how to overcome them. And then when they figure it out, put more difficult controls on and give hints how to overcome them then.
I've been doing that without the hints and without deliberately wanting them to overcome them. I just got to stay ahead. They overcome it. I was just like, oh, mostly it's the passwords, you know, for the I use weak passwords for all the stuff that they're involved with, and they can usually, after they figure it out once or twice, or I have to give it to them once or twice because I'm just so like exhausted, or I'm in the middle of 20 things at once. Like, Daddy, I can't open it. Okay, here's the password, and then poof, now it's like off to the races.
I know you mentioned Pegasus earlier, but
yes, yeah, Pegasus is a nice. I'm actually very proud of the fact, and again, I can't believe Pegasus isn't being covered by mainstream media more. But I'm proud of the fact. I mean, when that list of 50,000 numbers hit, and we're like, oh dear Lord, and we don't know for a fact that 50 is all Pegasus people who've been hacked by Pegasus, but I suspect it is. And that's, we believed it was at the time. We're like, we don't know, but that's what it's purported to be, and I think it probably is. And so far, everything we've seen supports that, and that's fucking scary. That means there's a problem. That means there's a serious problem.
If you create malware, you can complain when it gets out in the world. It gets used for things you didn't intend it for.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, you'd have thought we'd have learned this lesson when the CIA lost a bunch of its tools out into the internet. I mean, now we have ransomware against entire pipelines. You know, that's
okay.
You think they'll learn that lesson?
Well, that's another thing we need to do. Sorry, go ahead.
No, you first. I'll remember my question.
I don't know if I would. That's another thing we need to stop doing. We need to either have like a separate network for these critical systems that's not connected to the worldwide network, or we just air gap these systems. We can do it. It would be a pain, but...
All right, well, let me just as a reminder, anyone who wants to call in, our call-in number is in the title of the show, and right at the top of the thing, you can call in. You can come in through Teams, any number of ways to come in if you want to come in and hang with us and chat about these topics. The one thing I do, so the question I had was, okay, so this software was created by an Israeli security firm in Israel, and they are allowed to license it only to government agencies or to governments themselves, and they have to be certified as friendlies who will follow the rules, and they can only do it with the approval of the Secretary of Defense for Israel for each individual sale. Now, I don't care that this is going to get out and it's going to be abused by governments. They sold it to Saudi Arabia, for fuck's sake. That Saudi Arabia was going to abuse it is, I mean, the sun's going to come up tomorrow too, breaking news, in case anybody wants to hear about it. So...
But is that inductive or deductive?
Uh-oh, here we go. Depends on how you frame it. Thank you, Sinister, for that. Oh, shoot. I think Sinister got disconnected. I don't know what happened. At any rate, so here's the question. Is it, kitty, we'll come back for the kitty. We can't disconnect the kitty. So here's the question. Is there any way that an Israeli firm of all fucking, things didn't realize that this was going to happen, that the Secretary of Defense for Israel didn't realize that this was going to happen, and they just said fuck it and gave it away anyway? Or sold it, but sold it to people they knew would abuse it. I mean, they cannot have been this stupid. Did I really mute everybody? What's going on?
I just think we are in agreement.
Okay.
On one point, I wanted to come back to something. But just wanted to come back.
You missed a golden opportunity there. You should have just started moving your mouth like you were talking, because he didn't realize that there was nothing wrong with the audio.
Nothing wrong with the audio. Thanks. Ooh, you've been talking to the wrong people. You've been getting some bad ideas. This is not good. This is really not good. Okay. Well, the problem is with the new system that you're connected to, I can't mute just one of you. If I want to mute Isandring, you both go. So I was like, oh fuck! Now I got to figure out just how much I like having Sinister on the show, because it's a tough call.
Worth putting up with me?
Yeah. I think for now. All right. So no, I feel. And every time they sit there and say, well, because they keep reiterating their licensing structure, I was like, fuck your licensing structure. You sold it to Saudi Arabia. What the fuck did you think was going to happen? It's a dictatorship. It's a fascist regime, and sorry, but basically they're terrorists. And by the way, we're their number one source of guns and weapons. So we're doing the same thing. I'm not suggesting that Israel isn't, but Israel can't. Oh, for fuck's sake! I mean, just give me a break.
That's the issue I wanted to come back to.
Yeah,
it's important to note that all of this discussion of inflation is not just an American problem right now. Everywhere is having problems with inflation, because what we've had is a global pandemic that's disrupted quite a bit.
Well, we've had a lot of, and I should probably, well, no, I'm gonna, I don't know. I mean, we've obviously had supply problems. We've had problems with businesses staying in. This affects both supply and demand for different products differently. The inflation. I did look at the inflation numbers before the show, and I think they're up. I think that so there's the two. There's the consumer price index, and then the business index, which is what's it called again in Isandring? The purchaser is it
PPI? The
PPI,
producer price index.
So one is basically for consumers, and the other one's for producers. And usually they're off by about 0.5% each. I think the consumer is usually about 0.5 point lower, but they do vary wildly from time to time, and I think that's actually a pretty serious problem, because if you're trying to accurately understand, if you've got two different indexes, I mean, it's sort of like the Dow and the NASDAQ, the two should reasonably well go up and down at roughly the same time. If they don't, it's not really, one of them's not reflective of the stock market. At least one of them is not reflective of the stock market. So, I don't, I don't even remember. I was going to say something else about inflation. I don't remember. I mean, inflation in and of itself is not necessarily a bad thing. You're always going to get inflation. One of the funniest, there are a number of causes of inflation. One of them is we believe there's going to be inflation, so there's inflation. It's funny. There's actually three causes. There's cost driven inflation, price pulled inflation, and then inflation from everybody just believes that the price of things is going to go up because it has historically, so they expect more money in wages, and actually by increasing wages, you are in fact increasing inflation as well. So it sounds counterintuitive, but you do. So at any rate, but people expect that they're going to get raises regularly. Because people are getting raises regularly, you end up with inflation. That's one of the reasons, at least.
Deflation can happen too, though.
Yes, it can. But I was going to say the other one, and I don't care. I appreciate, we had Vox on as a co-host for a while, and she was a modern monetary theorist, and she had on her Discord a professor of modern monetary theory, and I asked him point blank on what grounds he could possibly argue that printing money did not increase inflation, and he said it named one instance when it had. I named three, and he said, well, no, all of those were for different reasons. And I was just like, okay, there were other things that were affecting it. That's true. But, this is how it was.
There's always other things affecting it.
Yeah, there's always other things going on in the world. Just because there's other things. It was, I was like, you still haven't actually explained why it wouldn't happen. You just said it never has. And you've hand waved every example I've given as well, the sun was also rising that day. It's like, oh God. But we should get a modern monetary theorist on here. I think I still have the name of that guy. And get him on and have a conversation with him, because I don't, at any rate. So debt doesn't matter. So debt is almost not even a thing if you're a country. You can print your own money and you don't have to worry about inflation. And even if you did have to worry about inflation, and the inflation's not really a bad thing, which I'll admit it isn't necessarily a bad thing, and you're always going to get some of it. That's the
not
problem.
Always.
You're right.
The Great Depression was deflationary.
You're right. You still are getting inflation.
It's terrifying.
Yes, you do still get inflation, Isandring. It's just negative inflation.
Yeah, okay. We call that deflation.
Oh, you call that deflation. I call that negative inflation.
Okay. And it's something that the Fed is terrified of, too, which is why they always shoot for a goal of, like, roughly 2% inflation a year.
Why are they terrified?
Most places shoot for... because they cannot. If you start going into a deflationary spiral, there is nothing that the Fed can really do about that.
Well,
I mean, it's the forces that drive a deflationary depression. We have more that we could try and do, but a deflationary depression can cause a hell of a lot more damage, especially today because of the amount of debt we have. See, inflation is actually positive if you have a lot of debt, because the purchasing power of that debt is decreased over time as inflation rises. And in a deflationary period, if you have debt, it's really bad because the purchasing power of that debt increases. So you don't want that, because if you have a lot of debt, you don't want that, because it can wipe you out really fast.
It's probably another way that modern monetary theorists want to get rid of. Sit there going, you can have as much debt as you like. Well, that's why they don't care about the printing money either, right? Because you print money, A, you can buy off the debt, and B, even if you fail to buy off the debt, you create so much inflation that the debt's meaningless anyway. Oh, dear Lord.
Yeah, like I said, you could try and just, if you were to start hitting a deflationary spiral, that would probably be about the only thing that the Fed could do, is just drop rates to a negative, monetize the debt, and then just blow a hell of a lot of money into. I mean, the Fed operates a little bit differently than a lot of central banks in like Europe, for example, because the Fed actually has a balance sheet, and it has to make sure that balance sheet is balanced. And if it isn't, then they actually send things like bills to the federal government. So it does function just slightly differently. That's the U.S. dollar. People complain. It's like, well, it's backed by nothing. It's like, well, it's not entirely true. It's backed by the Fed's balance sheet. So there is at least some sort of balance or backing there. Of course, it still relies on the full faith and credit of the United States. But one of the good points is, and I'm kind of to the, everybody's experiencing some inflation across the world. It's because we have a global economy. So, nothing can happen to other countries that doesn't ripple through and affect other economies. And a lot of the countries are facing some of the same problems that has, kind of kicked off our inflationary issues, which was the pandemic. In the 70s, we had the oil embargo, really kind of kicked off a huge amount of inflation too. The events may be a little bit different, but, they end up rippling through the economy in very similar ways. But one of the nice things about our economy is it's very large and it's very complex, and those kinds of systems are often very hard to push one way or the other because there's so many different dominoes that have to be set up before you run into serious uncontrollable problems. And the more dominoes that have to be set up, the more difficult it is to push, let's say, into a hyperinflationary cascade. It's hard to get to that point because you have to have so many more dominoes set up. The only unfortunate part is we seem to actually be purposely setting up several of these dominoes that are needed, and we shouldn't be doing that.
I think a better model to look for right now, rather than the 70s, to see what happened after the Black Plague.
Really? Oh, yeah, of course, because, okay, so we're saying
the world collapsed.
Well, Europe collapsed. That wasn't the world, but...
Well, yeah, Europe collapsed. Well, it's because it mostly affected Europe, but yeah. Ask Europeans, any Europeans. That was the world in the 1400s.
Well, it was the world to them. I think the Chinese might have a different take on that. And
that's why I said you need to ask a European.
Yeah. Well, I did... it's a hard turn, and if we want to, we can come back to this. But there was one thing that I had wanted to bring up because I got sent this earlier, and I had forgotten to mention this, and I did want to bring this up, just because. It's going to become obvious why I'm bringing this up as soon as I do. Isandring, do you know who 𝐂𝐚𝐥𝐥 𝐈𝐧 is?
That name sounds familiar. Medeiros sounds very familiar.
Medeiros.
And I'm drawing a blank right now.
He is a truck driver.
Maybe it might be a different Medeiros, but
he's a truck driver. He was sentenced actually.
Sentenced to 100-something years in prison. Yes. because he lost his brakes going down a Colorado grade and ended up causing a chain reaction accident and ended up killing 4 people.
That's the guy. So it was just sentenced on December 13th. So what do you know about the story?
I do know about the story. He was sentenced to over 100 years in prison because the judge said that mandatory sentencing required him to sentence him to that.
So the judge objected.
That
and the
he would, yes. He said he would not have sentenced him to that had he had any leeway.
So it was, he had no previous criminal record, and it looks like his brakes failed. So, to the best of my understanding, and I just became aware of this a short while ago, it was not his fault. It was he crashed. He crashed into traffic going on a downgrade. He lost the use of his brakes, and it was just a vehicular homicide. And then he was. And I don't know if in Colorado they have a different vehicular homicide versus involuntary manslaughter or whatever, but it certainly wasn't deliberate, and it appears like it may not even have been his fault, but he was in fact found guilty, and because of the mandatory minimum, it's 110 years. So now a number of things are going on. First of all, a number of truckers apparently are refusing to go through Colorado. Because they're like, listen, if my brakes failed, I don't want to end up 110 years in jail because my brakes went bad. And then, there's a trucker. It's an anonymous one. I assume it wasn't you. I no longer go through Colorado. I've told all my drivers not to take any loads or fuel up there. They'll be paid extra to go around if they have to. They're also doing it in part, also justice for 𝐂𝐚𝐥𝐿 𝐈𝐧. There is now a petition of Jesus, how many is it? I think it was 4 million. 4 million people from change.org, which is a left-wing organization that was founded after, and I should know this one. It had something to do with Clinton, but I've forgotten what it was. Okay, so change.org, 4.3 million signatures asking for clemency or commutation to time served. So that's it. I was curious to know how much you had known about it because I had gotten that one. I thought that would be an interesting one.
I don't know enough of the specifics. like the exact evidence and stuff that was presented in court. Some of the stuff that I have heard about it, people, talking about the case, so take that with a grain of salt. But my understanding is there were some maintenance issues that were known beforehand and were not addressed. Though from my understanding, those maintenance issues wouldn't have led one to believe that you were going to completely lose your brakes. 2, he was going down a grade, started going down the grade. There's a 45-mile-per-hour speed limit. He was doing 55 or 60 or something like that. He was speeding down the grade to begin with. And thirdly, he passed a runaway vehicle ramp and did not take it. Ooh. So those are the things. Like I said, I did not look at the actual evidence. Those are just what people have been talking about in regards to the actual case. I did hear about the outcome of the case.
All right, I figured you'd be. So here we are. We've got a trucker who knows more about economics than a fellow trucker who got what kind of oh my God, your brotherhood? Aren't you guys like a brotherhood? You don't like.
Yeah, that's not a thing anymore.
It's not a thing. Oh, okay. But it was once, huh?
It used to be in the 70s. Yeah,
okay.
It used to be in the 70s. Trucking was really kind of a brotherhood thing. But that was also in the time of regulation, where government controlled what kind of operating authority a company was allowed to have. And in order to even apply for operating authority, you had to show cause and a need for expanded service in any particular freight lane before you could even be considered for being granted operating authority. And then, the 80s hit, deregulation happened, and anybody could apply for authority and compete with each other. So, there was a huge change in the 80s, and the advent of technology and the increase in regulation, especially on what drivers can do, driver hours of service, for example, which ironically was ushered in because of drivers. Drivers wanted the hours of service, so they couldn't be told they have to drive 23 out of every 24 hours. And now drivers complain about the hours of service because the government took it too far. And
or they think they did.
Rules. Well, and actually that brings up two things that I thought. So first is the shooting on the set of Rust with Alec Baldwin, and any responsibility he has. I saw an interesting take on that. But then the other one is women's soccer has now been told that they will be getting the same contract as the men. And not only that, but they're going to be splitting the awards between the men and the women. So if one of them wins the World Cup, that money gets split. If both of them wins the World Cup, that money gets split. So they will each be getting identical contracts. And both teams are now objecting to the new setup, which I really said was exactly. I said if the World Cup has any brains at all, they'll just say fine and make them all take the same contract, and that's what they did. And they even went a step further and said,
FIFA.
"What?"
Or U.S. Soccer.
Yeah, U.S.
You said
Soccer.
the World Cup. The World Cup's not an organization.
Yes, you're right. I meant U.S. Soccer. So, and then they took it even a step further, which is aside from giving them the same contract, because they get different awards from FIFA. They evened those out too, and they said, okay, no, you're gonna have to split the awards. So the men, do get paid more for winning the World Cup. I think 20 times more than the women get for winning the World Cup. I'm like, okay, you're gonna have to split it. But what that also means is if the men don't win the World Cup and the women do, the women still have to split their winnings with the men. Because, sorry, what?
Considering the women's team is far more likely to win a World Cup.
Well, I think that's one of the reasons the women are upset. The women are upset for a couple of reasons. First of all, they are going to lose all their benefits. The women's team had a lot of benefits that they had opted for in their contract, including they were salaried, which meant that when an entire year was lost to COVID, they still earned on average $100,000 each when the men earned nothing. The men didn't earn a penny. That's not going to happen now. If COVID costs everyone another year, the women's team earns zero because that's what the men's team earns. So, and they are objecting to that, and the U.S. soccer organization is saying, well, that's fair. We're not gonna give different contracts to the men and women anymore. So, and the women are also they're a better team, but they're gonna have to split their winnings because the men and women are gonna be paid the same. So that's I don't know what that's gonna. How that's going to pan out. I don't think that's a particularly good idea, but that's the results of the suit. So, and the women have lost everything that they explicitly negotiated for in their contract.
So can't Isandring just telepathically contact the trucker I mind?
I
want an answer to this question.
I've been trying, but the connection's gone down for some reason. Damn technology.
Oh, maybe you need to get your booster shot.
Yeah, get your COVID.
Probably.
Get the 5G plus booster.
I was very disappointed that I didn't get my tail and wings when I got my shot. So I'm kind of disgusted with the whole process. So.
Oh, you did?
Really, I started getting 5G cell phone service. The amazing thing is, I don't even have a 5G cell phone.
It's just wired straight into your head. Well, I just assumed that he'd be getting his. I thought Isandring would know all this trucking stuff because I heard that Tucker Carlson was talking about it, and so was Glenn Beck. So I figured, oh well, then Isandring's gonna know because that's where he gets his marching orders from. But I guess not.
Well, I mean, I don't pay a whole lot of attention. The trucking industry is gotten pretty petty about a lot of things. I follow it superficially, just for kind of like the big things that I might need to know about, like the FMCSA has released, new proposed hours of service, and I might need to go read them and comment. But other than things like that, I don't follow it too much. I do follow like freight lanes and freight rates, but that doesn't have anything to do with like if somebody gets into an accident.
Oh, Amazon issues false copyright strikes against New World YouTuber for reporting bug. That's a good job, Amazon.
What was the other one Amazon did? Amazon's been, yeah. Oh, I mean, Amazon is, hold on one second. Is that? Yeah, I don't know. I think I really try to apply maximal charity. And one of the things Amazon had said during the tornadoes was, well, we wanted everyone to stay in the warehouse because it's a designated shelter area. And it may or may not have been, I don't know. And if they think it was, then that's kind of reasonable. But they had actually said that people couldn't leave. Well, you can't force people to stay in a shelter. You just can't. So I don't think that's why they were having them stay there. And then it turns out that if it was a designated shelter, it certainly didn't do a particularly good job. And then it turns out that they were telling other people who wanted to come back to shelter, and they said, no, if you do that, you're abandoning your route and you're going to get fired. And it's just like, oh, dear Lord. Okay. So, yeah.
We need to start holding people in high positions like that accountable with criminal charges.
I think that's the only way anything's going to change. I think you're absolutely right. And we got another Jake 40, $5. Thank you again, Jake, so much. We really appreciate your support. The women's team were greedily fighting on the platform of equality when they were making far more than the men's team. They wanted more of an advantage over the men. I think they got swept up in it. So I think what happened was, this is my take. I think they got pissed that they would have made much more if they had the men's contract, which is true. They would have. But then again, the year before, the men made zero, and they made on average $100,000 each. So there are advantages to it. And everybody, when you buy insurance, when somebody buys insurance on their car, and people, I have a buddy who sold insurance for a while, and he said the number of people who called him and said, "Well, it turned out I didn't need the insurance, so I want a refund." That's not how insurance works. The insurance you pay on the basis you might need it. If it turns out you don't use it, you don't get your money back. It is essentially a form of gambling, but it's insurance. And the women would always make money no matter what, and the men wouldn't. And one year that worked out really badly for the men, but they didn't sit there and say, "Oh, this is unfair." That was the contract they wanted. Now the men thought they were going to do really well. If they had, they'd have made 20 times more than the women, but they didn't. They did really poorly, and they made less than the women. Women did spectacularly well, and they didn't get that much more for doing so awesome. And if they'd been on the men's contract, then they would have done great, but they weren't. And I think there was some regret about that in post, but that there always is when you pay a lot of money for insurance and then you don't need the insurance. People, you get buyer's remorse. But again, if they were willing to give back the money that they had earned when the men didn't get anything, if the women were saying, well, we want to be fair, let's give back the $100,000 we each made that previous year, I'd be more inclined to think this was about equity. My suspicion is that the women's the issue of women's equity had been in the air. There was the women's or equal pay day had been coming up, and I think they got kind of sucked into it and got sucked into a fact that they were having kind of sour grapes over their contract not having been as based on performance when they were just an exceptional fucking team. They were
much
really
better
good.
than the men's team.
Much better. And they had opted not to have a contract based on performance. And so they were trying to figure out what they could do about it. And instead they made it about when the head of the women's team came up and said, I'm paid less than a man despite doing the same job. No, you were offered the same contract. You said no. And you went for another one with very different, completely different layout. And actually, that was a lie. She lied. And I think they got caught up in that. And now there's going to be consequences.
Titan brings up something I think is a good point, and I meant to bring up myself, because in any large enough building, the entire building is not going to be a shelter area, but certain sections of it will be designated as a shelter area. So I understand this was the case in both the candle factory that wasn't owned by Amazon and the Amazon warehouse. Because I believe the Amazon warehouse was in Illinois, about 2 hours from where I live, in fact, where the candle...
I forget where it was, but the bathrooms... The bathrooms were supposed to be, believe it or not, the shelter area. That's what the employees were told. I don't know why somebody would turn a bathroom into a shelter area, but apparently that's what it was, and that's where they were waiting. And one of the bathrooms was cut in half, and one of the people who died was
one of the people died in the bathroom. But
that's why they were there.
The reason that they generally make bathrooms that way is because there's a lot of pipes that run through there, which offer extra rigidity and support.
Oh, okay. All right. Well,
that's why if you look at tornado safety videos or whatever for just your private home, and you're stuck and you don't have a designated shelter, they tell you to get to an interior bathroom because the pipes will help hold things together better and makes the room more structurally sound than just any other regular room in the house.
But you see, here's the
get down in the bathroom.
Here's the difference, though. That's
or
not
the bathtub.
quite.
Lay down in the bathtub.
That's not quite what I was asking, though, right? Because that may be the safest place to go, and that I did not know, so I'm glad to know that. But if you were going to build a sheltered area for a building so that you say, if this building looks like it's going to get hit, everybody has a place to go, I don't think you'd build it in the bathroom. I think you'd make a concrete thing, probably in the basement, or you'd make a basement if you have to that can hold however many people, and you'd reinforce it with concrete, and you'd make it specifically able to withstand. So while a bathroom may be more able than any other room just naturally to withstand a tornado, they had said that there was a designated tornado area, which suggests to me that there was an area that was designed to withstand it. Now, the bathroom may have been the strongest, but I don't think it was a designated tornado area. Does that make any sense?
Regardless, once
I think what...
Yeah, Isandring, and then... Let's have Isandring answer, because I had asked Isandring a trick question, so I'd like to hear him answer, and then we'll porpoise.
Yeah, if you're going to make some new building in an area that's tornado prone, you generally design in an actual tornado shelter, which is usually a reinforced concrete room, with no windows, generally in an interior area or a basement area. But it could be that they didn't specifically do that. They just designated that area as the shelter area because it was the strongest area already. And they didn't design in a specific tornado shelter room. They just decided, well, we'll use the bathrooms because that's the strongest area.
Okay. I guess that makes sense. So what were you going to say, Porpoise?
Regardless, Yeah, regardless of whether or not the bathrooms are the shelter area, when the tornadoes went off, they should have been told to shelter. And actually, Titan brings up a good point, and does have, I think that was something I wanted to touch on. But then again, Amazon workers may not even know where the bathrooms are, never having been allowed to use them. This isn't quite the case, although it's fairly close, is that Amazon uses an algorithm to determine productivity that a lot of its workers are afraid of, and they fire people based on the results of this algorithm because they're trying to treat people like they're machines. This is one of the cases where basically computer scientists tend to be a lot like mad scientists, where they're not really paying attention to the effects of what they do, and they haven't had to really think about the social implications of what they're doing. So I think maybe one of the things we need to look at is we need to get a little bit more regulation on the use of technology here. Although I would hate to have any member of the current Congress do it, because most of them don't even know how to turn on a computer.
My sister was a press secretary for Congresswoman Helen Chenoweth. So she worked in Congress for a while. And it's funny because she would tell me these stories of what would actually happen in behind the scenes. And she was an anti-vaxxer for a while, my sister. And it was, she and I had some contention about it. And she didn't want to vaccinate her kids when she first had them. I said, why not? She goes, you wouldn't believe the testimony that I've heard from inside Congress. And it took a while. It took about 2 years before she really had done enough of her own independent research to realize that the expert witnesses that Congress had called up to testify were complete fucking quacks. And Congress, she had been assured, and her congressman had been assured that these were people who knew exactly what they were. And she started to go through the process of how because she was there for the testimony live. And she believed every word of what these experts were saying, and then she learned later that they were nuts. They were just fucking crazy, and everybody knew they were fucking crazy. Nobody could believe that they were testifying in front of Congress. And then she's trying to figure this out, and she thought this was the exception. Years later, she had reached the conclusion: no, this is the norm. The norm is, and it's because I remember this too when I remember when they were talking about Napster, and they said Napster is this horrible program because it allows for file sharing. And anybody who knew anything about this kind of thing was just like, okay, if you were to list the top 5 file sharing programs, Napster might eke out into the 5th, maybe. And they were taking it like, if we stop Napster, and when they shut down Napster, like, no, file sharing's done. It's like, you've done nothing. There were programs that were far better, faster, and more, and used by, and here's this program that the U.S. Congress said was the biggest file sharing program, and it wasn't even fucking close. They did nothing to stop illegal file sharing. They didn't even slow it down. And that was sort of my experience with it. And then from there on to that was all around the same time when my sister had been working. And it was just what was the point of this? Yeah, you'd really hope that Congress and people who study Congress, whatever the fuck that means, already knows, most congressmen never read the bills that they sign. They don't read them. They have staffers read them. The staffer explains it to them. The staffer's job is to know what their views are and to know whether they're going to like the bill or not. And the staffers are usually actually pretty good at this because they hire people who really are going to do it and do it right because it's an important job. But the job is to tell the congressman how to vote. And there are times the congressman doesn't even know how they're going to vote. They don't even know what they're voting on. And they just talk to a staffer and say, how am I voting? The staffer says, yes, no, whatever. And they go and they vote. They don't know what they voted for. They don't know. They hadn't read it. They're voting the way the staffer tells them. So, Sinister, looks like you were going to say something, so I wanted to.
Well, a number of states actually have and I think Indiana is one of them, have a read the bill law that prevents congressmen from voting on bills they haven't read. What many people have found that happens after that is that the bills tend to get a lot shorter.
Yeah.
And there's a lot less chance.
Yeah, please.
There's a lot less chance to sneak addendums in.
Well, what pisses me off most about this, though, is it kind of feeds into, well, it means now when somebody like Isandring says government is inefficient and they're doing a terrible job, I actually have to fucking listen to him. Because it's like, yeah, he's got a fucking point, because they haven't read the bills. They don't have actual experts testifying. They don't even know how to find the experts. At least they didn't when my sister was working there. And frankly, from what I can tell, not much has changed. And we were just talking about the women's soccer thing, and Jake had mentioned a couple of things that I thought was interesting. And he had mentioned too that the women were offered the same deal as the men. And they rejected it because they wanted a deal that was less risky and had more security. Anybody who knows anything about economics is going to tell you you can usually do something like that, but that means you're going to have less reward. That's why less risk means less reward. If high risk, high reward situations, men do actually tend to be more comfortable with that kind of thing. That's what the men's team wanted. Women didn't want that. They got the contract they negotiated for. But the president of the United States came out and repeated a lie, and it was a lie, that the women's team were being paid less because they were women. A, they weren't being paid less. B, it wasn't because they were women. And how did he repeat this lie? Well, because somebody told him that that's what was happening, and he believed them. And I'm sitting there going like, this is how this shit gets perpetuated, and it's really scary, and it shouldn't work this way, but it really is. Yeah, I can tell Porpoise is getting tired. I'm getting a little tired, so maybe 15 minutes, folks, if that's good for everybody. The call-in number is still open. If anybody wants to call in, I'll leave it open for another maybe 2 minutes, and then I'll shut it down so that we don't have a call at the last second. But the number is in the title, and it's at the top of this, so anyone wants to call in. But yeah, so anyways, gross incompetence of our government. Conservatives may actually have a point. I can't believe I have to admit that. If I have to admit it, I don't know why I'm doing it publicly in a thing that's being recorded. I think this episode may just get lost, but yeah.
First off, I'd like to remind everyone now's the good time to get those solipsism jokes in person.
I will, thank you. I did need to remind myself for that, so thank you.
And secondly, I think part of the issue is we have people not respecting actual education unless it agrees with them. And we have the problem of anti-intellectualism contributing. And congressmen just want people to testify something that verifies their own preconceived biases. For things like science and technology, they were supposed to refer to the National Institute of Science and Technology, and I don't think they're doing that anymore.
I heard an interesting argument that all of life is a rebellion.
If it's DNA is code.
No, it's not DNA is code. No, Jesus, fuck, yeah. Once is enough on that one. That all of life is an exercise in resisting fear. Piaget said all salient learning is painful. All salient learning is painful. Anytime you learn something that teaches you something new, you have to learn that you had been wrong before, which nobody likes being wrong. You have to learn that the world is different than you had thought, and you hadn't had your head wrapped around it properly. And the more important and the more salient whatever it is you're learning, the more painful it is, because the more you realize that you really did have something wrong. So all salient learning is painful, and because of that, especially people who are fear averse, and we're all somewhat fear averse, but there are different degrees to it. There are people who are genuinely not afraid of anything, sociopaths. But regardless, if you're fear averse, you don't like learning new things because it reminds you of your own mortality. It reminds you of the fact that you are flawed. It reminds you of the fact that the universe is so unfathomably big, you will never have your head wrapped around it. You just won't. And if you're truly fear averse, that's why you deny vaccines, and that there are people that maybe even the vast majority of people who are denying the efficacy of vaccines, somewhere in the back of their minds are probably sure they're wrong. But it's more important to them that the universe be something they can understand than being right. And it's a need. It's an actual psychological need to keep the universe manageable. So whether they're right or wrong is no longer the issue. What the issue is can they demonstrate that they can compete in a world where there are PhDs who've studied stuff like this for a very long time, and we're telling them they're dead wrong. And they want to compete against that. The only way to do that is absolute denial. Oh, you're muted, Porpoise?
Yes,
Oh, there you go.
I'm just trying to think. Most of these people, it's like, yeah, PhDs have really studied an issue, but most PhDs cannot, I don't know, fix their car. Everyone has their own skills, and and yes, we do, like, the doctors are looked up to, but that doesn't mean your local mechanic isn't important. And in some cases, your local mechanic may make more.
I think the problem is information that you can't even begin to really wrap your head around how it works. I think people are scared of computers in some cases because formal logic. I mean, I've tried to teach people. I always before I actually taught computer science, I said you could teach logic to anybody. I still think you can teach logic to most people, including most people who say that they can't learn logic. But I found people who truly cannot learn it. Perhaps there's a fallacy here because it's just like, well, maybe I just can't teach it to them. But I mean, and I was in a computer science department with some pretty experienced computer science professors, and they said, yeah, there are people who just for whatever reason, their brain cannot grasp logic. There are some people who cannot grasp cars, not many. Most who don't learn how to do cars just would rather not learn. But I do think the number of people who can't grasp the higher end biology that we talk about when we talk about vaccines is not that high end biology, but it's high enough. I think the number of people who can't grasp that or who really don't want to is higher than most other areas. So I think that means when somebody like Dr. Fauci speaks, you're just like, oh, so I'm supposed to just listen to him because he's an expert. Well, you know what? I don't like arguing from authority, but the reality is, unless you have some grounds, and considering that you don't have the study to do it, and this is what he's dedicated his life to. And by the way, most of the conservatives who end up telling me, well, gee, we hate it when people just think they're an expert and they know it better than everything. Most of those conservatives, too, have plenty of subjects about which they consider themselves experts who are educating me on the topic. And on some of them, they genuinely are. But if they want me to listen, then it's sort of like, well, okay, so you're aware that there are experts and you're aware that a lifetime doing something does actually afford you something other people don't have. And Fauci's got that. Doesn't mean he's right about everything. Doesn't mean he's infallible. But, it does mean you need to listen to them and listen to some other people. And if you can find scientists who disagree with them, maybe listen to them too. But, yeah, I don't know.
Well, he's become demonized. And quite frankly, speaking of people who can't learn like basic Boolean algebra, I know of someone who only gets it right about half the time.
Are we about to get into truth tables? Porpoise, are you going to bring up truth tables?
Sorry.
Okay, hold on. Okay,
it's just something that bugs me far more than it should.
Yep, bad porpoise, no biscuit or no fish, whatever it is. No fish for you today. All right. So okay, we haven't heard from Isandring for a little bit, so I'd like to hear from Isandring and see if there's anything else anybody wants to say, and then we'll wrap it up and head out of here.
The truth will set you free, but first it's going to piss you off.
That was Gloria Steinem, I believe. Am I correct on that? I think I'm correct on that, Gloria Steinem.
Yeah, several people have said it. A lot of people have attributed it to lots of different people.
All right. Yep, that's a good one.
They use slight different variations. I mean, I just happen to like the first it'll piss you off. Most people say first it will make you angry. But
shit. All right. Well, okay. Well, is there anything anybody wanted to wrap up and chat about? Anything anybody wanted to plug? Talk about who you are, Porpoise. Anything that you wanted to, where people can find you, what you or anything else about any topic that we've talked about that you wanted to get in? Any other final words here?
Well, I'm kind of taking a break over Christmas because I can't decide what to do. And the YouTube channel, well, problem is after turning my YouTube channel away from a certain topic, that it's going to take time to rebuild it.
Yeah. That's interesting. I will say this. I'm not sure that there are any topics that maybe you shouldn't do on YouTube, but I think there's a lot of drama channels out there, and they do quite well. They really do. And if I ever really wanted to up the sub count on In Time, we could start doing drama. And I've dabbled in it on occasion. I've actually rather enjoyed it because I got a lot of attention the few times I've done it, but usually I've noticed it ends up hurting people, and I've ended up hurting people, and I was just like, "Ooh, I don't like this side to it," and so it is not what we do, and it will never be what we do. So, it's one of those things. I don't know how you're going to reach a conclusion about what you do or don't want to do. I certainly understand the temptation. And one of the things I've noticed about you versus other people who do drama channels is you really do seem to have a sense of joy and fun about it. It's just kind of a good sense of humor, which is as far as drama channels go. I think it's a good way to approach it. But it's a challenge because what is nobody wants to watch the Eat Your Vegetables hours, right? So I get it, but wherever you decide to go on it, think about it and make a decision that works good for you.
Hello there, Athena.
And the kitty. Listen to Athena. Athena. One of my cats is named Athena. Athena and 𝐂𝐚𝐥𝐸 are our two cats. We tend to name them after Greek gods. Apollo was one of our first cats. So Athena and 𝐂𝐚𝐥𝐸.
No, that's mop water, kitty. I forgot to empty that.
Oh, dear Lord. Okay. So, so he's lurking. Well, we're wrapping up. I'm sorry that you've come in to lurk, and we're wrapping up. We had a interesting discussion on education, economics, a few other things. So, I'm glad nobody. No, speaking of, nobody called to give Isandring a hard time. I am really disappointed. I thought we had a liberal audience that wanted to just call and explain to Isandring where it's at and what it's really like. Nobody wanted to do that. I just, I can't say how disappointed I am in my liberal brethren. All right.
It's because they secretly agree with me and disagree with you.
What really scares me is that there's some truth to that. That's absolutely terrifying. Yeah. All right. Well, so is there anything else that you wanted to I don't know, say either about the monetary policy, the trucker, or education? I did like that quote you gave. The truth will set you free, but first it will piss you off. I do think that version is usually attributed most to Gloria Steinem, but
yeah, it's I realize people have lives to live, and they're getting on with the business of living, and trying to take time to learn about economics. Most people find economics pretty boring. Economics also tends to be quite a lot more conceptual because you're trying to conceive of the things that you don't see. The whole invisible hand of economics. So it can sometimes be a little more difficult to kind of grasp because you have to be able to visualize the things that never happen because of actions. So it gets a little bit boring. A lot of people don't like economics, even though it's incredibly important. I wish more people would get a little bit more curious about how things actually work in the world around them.
There are a lot of things to be curious about and how things actually work. I mean, you do need to have a basic understanding of economics. And by the way, coming back to a point earlier, there is an excellent book that refutes Atlas Shrugged that was written before Atlas Shrugged. It was called The Fountainhead.
Yeah, the Fountainhead too. Yeah, that's that's an interesting one. Oh dear Lord, yeah, that's okay. Oh,
well, I found a pretty good. I mean, even if you want to go the Keynesian route, you still have to get kind of the basics. And I think one of the better books that I've listened to on just the fundamentals of economics, understanding some of the principles that are involved, is Economics in One Lesson by Henry Hazlitt. That was a pretty good one. It really does a good job of getting the fundamental base of the things you need to be able to conceptualize really well.
I did one of the,
and of course, there's a lot of other issues that and sometimes you don't know. Okay, well, I kind of have a limited amount of time. What is it that I need to look at? And there's so many things that people should know about, especially considering we're voting on representatives to go vote on laws that are going to be passed on these things. You should probably know at least a little bit about it.
I do think one of the things that's intimidating about economics, I could be wrong, but I think it obviously is going to be different for different people. But one of the ones that I think affects people a lot is that the data you're dealing with becomes so large very quickly with so many factors that while you can talk about sort of while you can try to talk about trends or where you think things are going, you end up with so many economists disagreeing about what's going to happen in the future, where things are going to go. And it's not because they're wrong or they're idiots or because it's all made up, but because you it very quickly becomes almost a problem of chaos, which is, okay, we can forecast, the weather out to about 7 days, and past that, there's just too much data. It doesn't mean that we don't actually understand what causes the weather. We understand exactly what causes the weather, but over a long enough time scale, a butterfly flapping its wings in China really can cause a hurricane in Texas. So, there's so much data involved in that we can't even begin to process it really past 7 days. So you end up with the same problem, I think, when you start really getting into economics, which is, we lose the ability to make accurate projections because there are so many things influencing the data, and we can only account for so much of it. I don't know. That's my thought. What do you think?
That and it's unethical to do like controlled experiments in economics unless you do it in something like an MMORPG. Sociology is that way too. And actually, I do recall running across a sociologist who had built an RPG to study some of his ideas.
Well, the EVE Online is one of those that I've played that before, and I was just like, oh, I can see why economists are interested in this. That is a true neoliberal paradise right there. EVE Online is, and I think a university wanted to buy the game so that they could influence it and run tests on it, and then the owner said no, and then they said, well, could we just fiddle with the economy every now and then? You can tell us what happens. And like, no, our gamers aren't your experiments. But it's a true. I mean, it's unbelievably well done the way that economy works. It's a real economy, and it's a completely laissez-faire. But the other one that, I mean, we had gotten into I had gotten into an argument a long time ago about the pink tax, and the problem was they were thinking, the people I was discussing it with thought it was a social problem, and they were discussing it socially, even though they thought they were discussing it economically, and they were talking about, why do businesses do this? It's like they do this because women will pay more, Well, that's why. And like, oh my God, it's unfair to expect. Well, I don't care what's fair. The businesses, and they're like, well, the businesses are deliberately setting the prices higher. No, they're not. Businesses don't set prices. They don't set prices. Price is set by supply and demand. If businesses could set prices, nobody would ever go out of business because they could just set the price high enough that they can pay for, the materials. I'm sitting there going like, that's just even a basic understanding of economics, where that level of understanding would I think help people understand a lot. And when I took my first course in economics, I found it really easy and very simple. But I think A, because my professor avoided the math, and B, because I had already had 2 years of psychology. And economics is very little more than human psychology. That's all. It's because, and of course, that's what it is, because we're the ones who invented it. So, all right. Anything else you wanted to say, Isandring? Because I think I sort of I just want to make sure that you.
No, like I said, I wanted to rant about my little economics issue and how it's not really being covered, I think, particularly well. Or, the people who are trying to give out information aren't giving out, I think, enough or the right kind of information.
All right. Well, thank you for that. I'm glad we got a chance to chat about it. Porpoise, thank you so much for coming, and I'm glad we got a chance to talk a bit about computer science, but in particular Pegasus, which I think that's going to be in the news more, and I think they're waiting for real confirmation that list of 50,000 means something. But they're still going through that list and covering it. That's one of those stories that maybe because it's Israel, we're not really covering it, I think, the way we should. I mean, that is scary that there are journalists on that list and that what happened to Khashoggi and the fact that may well have been empowered by Pegasus. That's scary. But at any rate, Stuxnet. Yeah, there's a whole bunch of. So thank you all for joining us today. Tomorrow we will be doing overtime, and we'll be covering all the week's news. I'm sure. Now, we did do a bit of a rundown early today. I'm sure we're going to be covering that and more. Joe will be with us tomorrow to do that. So please join us for that. And we look forward to catching up with all of you later. And thank you again to Isandring and to Sinister Porpoise for joining us. So thank you all. And we look forward to seeing you tomorrow. Night all. Welcome to In Time. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that bell for notifications. We read all of your comments, and if you like this video, please don't forget to share.